get ready. 4, 3, 2, let's go, 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 go. On your mark, get ready, set, go, 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 go. On that jump, that get up and go, 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 go. On your mark, you ready, go.
Get that do not disturb on. Am I on?
You are.
On air? Okay. Huh? Mic check good? Okay. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to talk about this thing called virtual production. My name is Brian Maeda. I'm one of the product managers on Unreal Engine. And we're going to walk you through some roadmap stuff that we're working on. We'll start with in-camera VFX, right? So here's some footage of us. This is something that we spend a lot of time with in our lab. We're workshopping every time, especially when we're about to do a new release. We spend a bunch of time in there just making sure the system's working well. And there's so much stuff that we can only really test, like actually in the volume. It's also an opportunity for some of our team to promote their acting careers, like walking around. Like we have a lot of walking around footage. But it's been a great experience. This is like just a little bit peek behind the scenes of what we do to make sure that Unreal is working well on the stages when you guys actually use it. In terms of new stuff, like quick recap of some of the recent updates that we've had. First off is the Unreal Stage iOS app. So something that's we've been working on for quite a while. The idea behind it is to in the volume, it's just very typical that the computers end up being quite far away from the stage, even though they are on set. And that can make it a little bit challenging to just see what the camera's seeing in order to make the changes that the real-time system offers. So the app is really focused on like creatives, like being able to make changes in the volume that affect the system via multi-user. So it's really oriented around this like idea of the light cards, like being able to use the volume for lighting. So the system's like a touch-based setup to like kind of drop in light cards, move them around, resize them, change the color, tint, whatever, so that you're able to use the volume for these, for what's outside of the camera to light the subjects on screen. There's also a lot of features that are oriented around color grading. Like this is something that's super common to like make the scene warmer, cooler, make adjustments, maybe just on the ceiling. There's a bunch of controls to kind of fine tune that stuff. We also have features to like make an isolated color correction that's kind of like a power window. You can do that all through the app. Another thing to mention is support for anamorphic lenses in the lens calibration system, right? So like so many of these projects, filmmakers love shooting with these anamorphic lenses. So the lens tools now support anamorphic in addition to spherical. And then on the nDisplay side, there's a bunch of stuff to cover. So like we've been working on nDisplay for quite a long time, and it's a little bit of time for like a little bit of a retrospective since there's been so many updates over the years, right? So if we think about where nDisplay started and where it is now, like in 4.23, we had a single GPU deployment. This is kind of in that like all-nighters on Mandalorian Season 1 era of the system. And then 4.27, we updated it to support mGPUs. So this brought along a lot of like performance improvements and ability to scale the types of content that you could do with the system. In 5.2, there's a little bit of a minor update, but like moved the needle a little bit higher, which was to use multi-process. Which ran with 2 Unreal processes. And now with 2110, we just feel like we're actually working. Like this is, we've made it to the point where we are sitting at the computer, really diving in and doing real work. And so, stepping through these, like this is maybe preaching to the choir, but from a terminology standpoint, we think of the viewports being what's outside of what the camera sees, right? So this is something that stays static. It's used for lighting and reflections, and then you may, for a given shoot, you may have one or more interfrustums that are like leveraging the track camera to always have the correct, perspective and parallax. So where we started in single GPU, right? So in this example, like from NAND, like there's 8 viewports, and that required 8 machines, each doing 1 viewport. And in terms of what Unreal, like how Unreal was working back then, you had 1 Unreal process with 1 GPU in that computer, and it was rendering 1 viewport plus potentially both of your cameras. So this ends up being quite a lot of stuff for like 1 computer to run, which meant that the overhead for what the performance overhead for what you could run was like a lot lower. There's just a lot of stuff. It required a lot more optimization. And then for determinism purposes, like based on where the camera would move, we would have to re-render the interfrustum on each one, because if you move from one to another, that had to, of course, be like smooth and consistent when you switched across them. In 4.27, we updated to an mGPU setup, so that kind of started to consolidate things. We were able to use 2 GPUs in each computer, and that kind of brought it down. Like, so we're able to run the system with 4 machines in this case. And in this setup, what we were doing is we were running one Unreal on a computer with 2 GPUs, and it would, the Unreal process would run the viewports on one and the interfrustums on another, and it would share them, right? So again, we're re-rendering the interfrustum on each render node to make sure that it's consistent across each one. But we can dedicate a full GPU to what's seen in camera, and that's shared via NVLink. And this was a big mechanism which allowed us to do much more complex scenes because we were able to dedicate more resources to what was seen in camera. In 5.2, there was like a relatively minor update that is like kind of like something that we discovered along the way of where we got to in 5.3, but this is using multi-process, so this allowed us to keep the same topology of the existing mGPU deployment, so stages could basically keep working the same way they were, but we were able to get a little bit more performance because what we learned is that it's actually a little bit more efficient to run 2 Unreal processes, each with 1 GPU. So this is like kind of a little bit of a subtle difference, like really between the last 2. Like we're now running we're distributing them basically the same way, but we're running 2 Unreals at the same time. So again, we are rendering the interfrustum like over and over and over again, right? Like so, I'm getting tired of saying it. Computers are getting tired of rendering it. But what we learned is that yes, like if we split this up into 2 processes, we're able to get a little bit more performance out of it because what we learned is that some of the rendering features, like especially the newer like UE5 rendering features like Nanite, Lumen, using virtual shadow maps, a lot of these things, the CPU and the GPU are always like kind of working together, and it turned out that on scenes that used a lot of these new features, some aspects of the processes were CPU bound, and so the GPU would be waiting on it, and we could eke out a little bit more performance by splitting them up. The other thing to mention is that for the transfer of the interfrustoms, to overlay it onto the outers and then send that to the wall, it's done by shared memory. It's not done by NVLink, which is important because the newer NVIDIA graphics cards don't support NVLink, so we needed a different way to do that sharing anyways. And so that's all leading up to the latest update, which uses the SMPTE 2110 standard. Something that's that's maybe, if you've heard about it, it may seem a little bit more like kind of broadcast or video based. It's a standard across the industry for IP over video, but for our purposes, we found that we're able to drive the LED wall this way, and it's leading to like a lot of nice advancement. So big items here are, with SMPTE 2110, we only have to render the interfrustum once. So we render it once, and that gets shared with all of the other render nodes that handle the outer viewport. So this brings up a lot more it allows us to use the resources a lot more efficiently. And as part of that, we can also dedicate an entire render node to the interfrustum, whereas before, if you had multiple cameras, they'd still probably be sharing the same process on the same GPU. It lets us put even more resources, like the maximum possible, to what's seen on camera. And it also allows us to be a lot more flexible with the deployment. And so when you're choosing how to set up nDisplay, you can bias it towards maybe something that's maybe more quality driven, where you're able to have more render nodes. Or you could try to do more viewports per render node and then potentially have a leaner setup, reduce the hardware footprint, right? So you can kind of choose those things or potentially even choose them on a per show basis. And it's been a long time coming. The engineering team has spent a lot of time on this. And it's basically taken us 3 releases. So in 5.1, we had experimental 2110 support. 5.2, we were able to do the interfrustum sharing across the render nodes with 2110. And then in 5.3, we're now able to output directly to the LED processors with frame lock. This also means that you don't need quadro sync either. So that's all being handled through the PTP aspect of 2110. So it's kind of streamlining the hardware part as well. Stepping back to our diagram, the idea here would be we'll kind of go through both of these scenarios, right? So in terms of using the flexibility for quality, right, we could take the existing setup we have and just add a node that is dedicated to what's seen in the interfrustum. And the way that looks is something like this, right? So you'll have one node. This is the one that's running the interfrustums. We kind of pick up on the hybrid setup here. We think of it as a little bit of a hybrid setup where it's using the multiprocess aspect that we just showed, but it's also sharing it through 2110. So we have a multiprocess node running. It's running, 2 processes, each one running an interfrustum, and that gets shared out through 2110 on the network. And then we also have another node that's maybe running 1 viewport each, right? So same idea where it's a 2 GPU system. It's running a viewport on each GPU. And that ends up happening is that it kind of pulls over the interfrustum from the network, just grabs it when it needs it, and then it sends back the overlaid output, and that goes directly to the LED processor. And then, kind of the flip side of this would be we're choosing to use it for more flexibility, right? So this is fewer nodes as part of that flexibility, and this is an example where we're able to do a leaner setup, right? So now this is maybe only a 3 machine setup to do the same type of deployment. So for the fewer node scenario, it's basically the same idea, right? You're still maximizing the kind of resources available to the interfrustum. That gets shared out to SMPTE 2110, and then on your render nodes that are doing the outer viewports, maybe you're doing 2, 2 per process, 4 total, and that's allowing you to get to do more with less computers. So this is kind of a lot. I don't know how it played. It's kind of a lot of information. I have a lot of trouble, it's even as we're working on it, we're okay, really slotting out what the difference is. Hopefully that was clear. But we are also working on like a number of ways to like just make sure that that we're getting the word out on like the ways to maximize the system and like bang for your buck, so to speak. So as part of this 2110 rollout, we're gonna be publishing like a white paper with like high-level hardware guidelines, because the topology of what's on the stage is gonna change. We're gonna work with our partners like NVIDIA, Megapixel, and Brompton, and some of our clients as well that work in production, just to make sure that it's very clear, like what the upgrade path is, what the options are. There's even more options actually from the flexibility aspect that I didn't cover, but it's starting to get in the weeds, and we'll cover that in the white paper. And then also on the engineering side, the team that worked on this is publishing a technical paper, and they're going to be giving a talk at the SMPTE Media Summit, if anybody's going to be going to that. But there'll be more resources available if you're really interested in like how it works under the hood. In terms of what's next, like kind of pivoting to like look ahead to what's going to be in the 5.4 release. On the in-camera VFX side, we're really focused on just rolling this feature out. Like it took a lot to get it to the place where it's even usable, and like there's it takes a while for people to upgrade hardware. So basically, our plan is to focus on making sure it rolls out well. Another thing to mention on the virtual production and ICVFX side is that we are aiming to have support for world partition, for use in virtual production. Like it's something that like historically we've kind of steered people away from. There have been a number of problems, like just things not quite working right. But we've been working with the world building team, and we believe that we're going to have this in place. One of the things that I've learned recently is there's some other aspect, because so much of our development is like in Unreal Engine as a whole is moving in this direction, and what we discovered is there's a couple of productions that were like having some certain issues, like getting the right look that they wanted. And what I learned, which was really interesting, was that there are certain cases where, like, if your scene is a world partition scene, you can actually get better results with Lumen. And so I think in the as we look ahead, what's going to happen is that even if you're not building a city, even if you're building a scene that's about the same size as the current scenes that people use in production, it's actually probably going to make sense to like make those world partition scenes anyways. And so that's something that we want to learn about and want to explore. There's also a number of like really elegant solutions for how you manage a scene, manage complex scenes, even if they're not necessarily like an open world scene. That I think are optimizations that will benefit stages. So there's a lot to learn there, but we had a few issues with level instances that we needed to address, and we think that we're going to be able to do that in the 5.4 timeframe. On the VCAM side, 5.3 has a bunch of new, nice features for people doing camera work, right? So first thing to mention is the camera rig rail. So this is an improvement to basically making dolly moves. There's a much more flexible and easy to use, artist-friendly ways to like lay down a track, move it around. A bunch of improvements for how you actually key those things in sequencer as part of this work as well. The iPad experience has a takes browser, right? So it's just pretty straightforward. But if you record a take, you can review it on the iPad directly. Like basically choose the one you want to watch. We also have support for multiple HUDs. And so this is like maybe a little bit of a deceptive feature, but when you play it through, you can see like from one computer, like we can be sharing out what the VCAM sees to multiple places, right? So you might have one where like the operator wants a certain view, like certain controls, like when they're actually controlling the iPad, but you may also be streaming that out to someone that's just reviewing it, like the director, supervisor, GP, whatever, and they want maybe like a leaner HUD with less GAC on the screen, right? So they can really focus on the image, and so now you're able to do that as part of the VCAM suite. And then last but not least is time-scaled recording. So time-scaled recording is something that is a pretty common practice where maybe you have a really fast-moving animation and you want to make like a really nuanced camera move. So you may choose to play the animation back at a different speed so that it's easier to get the camera move you want for VCAM purposes. So there's a nice feature add for that in 5.3. Looking ahead to 5.4, there's a number of other like kind of usability-focused features like that, where we're really looking to make the VCAM be considered production ready, right? So it's something that's been around for a long time, and the idea here is just get it over the finish line in terms of like having like a really robust out-of-the-box tool set for filmmakers. Specifically, the key areas we're focusing on are like this layered workflow concept where like, you may you may record like just the dolly move, and then you may record the camera move on top of it, and you can basically like non-destructively, add, concatenate moves. This is something that's really common with some of the more, the more sophisticated productions, and we want to make this easier to use and accessible for everybody. And we also have been working really hard with some people in this room, I think, to improve the pixel streaming latency. So what that ends up meaning is that the iPad, when you're moving around, it's just going to be more responsive. Hopefully you won't notice this. It'll just feel really comfortable and live. But there's a bunch of work going in to make sure that we can bring the latency down as much as possible. Last thing to mention is with the LiveLink VCams app itself, right? So like, for social media purposes, I feel like it can be risky. It's like a really risky place to like look at your mentions, read your replies. But I did that for ours. And if you look at any of our posts that are related to any of these apps, there's always like where's the Android version? Where's the Android version? So I'm not going to click on the like show additional replies that are offensive, but people are very passionate about Android. And if you look across like all of the different posts that we've had, all of the different ones, it's just like everybody's always asking for Android. And so that's something that we've really taken to heart. And we are, now working on like bringing in support for Android. I mentioned this earlier, but for the in-camera VFX Unreal Stage app, we built it in this framework called Flutter, which is like more of a cross-platform, like mobile toolkit. And it went really well. We were really happy with it. And so we're basically moving the VCam app over to that so that we can support Android as well as iOS. I think this has been a long time coming. The VCam is such an important tool, especially for people when they're starting to learn the engine, right? It's just so natural to be like, oh, I have this real-time scene. The first thing that filmmakers want to do is like drop a camera in, and the VCam is such a like tactile, comfortable way for people to get into the system. And a lot of people only have Android phones. Maybe they don't even have a tablet at all. So I'm really glad that we're working on this. Like all joking aside about all these, these like social answers, I'm really happy that we're doing this. It's just something that we've needed to do for a long time. Last thing to mention in this area is take recorder. So like we feel like in terms of where we spend our time, take recorder is something that I've always wanted us to work on more. And so as we've kind of made a lot more progress on the in-camera VFX side, it's allowing us to like take a look at the whole stack of features. And take recorder is one that we really want to invest in. So as we look ahead, like the next time I or somebody else gives one of these presentations, we're gonna we'll hopefully have a whole bunch of take recorder updates for it. It would be great to talk to people kind of offline here. Because we're kind of gathering how we should be making take recorder better, but recording's like a big priority, leading into a bunch of the other like kind of performance capture updates that are to come as well. In terms of rendering, like I kind of went back and forth on like what I should cover here, right? Because so many of the rendering updates are relevant to how people like achieve the scene that they want for virtual production. I kind of landed on this place where like I'm just recommending that people go to the rendering roadmap one. Like I was going through their presentation, I'm like, what should I pick? Like what should I add? And it was just really hard to choose what to add. So I really encourage people to check out these guys' talks later today. I think it's at 3:30. But there's a bunch of rendering updates. It's really focused around, basically being able to bring in bigger assets, more complex data, and still having it run in real time. But I defer to these guys who are much smarter than me to explain the details. There is one that I do want to call out, though, which is this sparse volume textures feature that's in 5.3, right? So this is basically allowing you to do these awesome, like, volumetric shots. You can bring in VDBs. It's another thing I know from a lot of client meetings. People have been asking about this capability. So I think that they'll have more of these in the rendering roadmap talk. But I just want to really call that one out because it's something that's super relevant. It's like a really nice new capability for this type of content that you weren't really able to do before. So I hope you check it out. On the rendering side, we will talk about tooling a little bit because that's a little bit more on the virtual production view, like how we are utilizing the rendering. So one thing to mention is the deadline integration, right? So this released at SIGGRAPH timeframe in the most recent deadline release, and what that means is that there's built-in support for submitting jobs from Movie Render Queue to deadline. what am I going to say about this? I mean, it's, everybody, like when people are scaling out their productions, using a render farm is common. You'll be able to automate stuff, even though it is like a really fast real-time render. You may choose to just like automatically render the sequence every day or something like that, and you can just batch that out to the farm. For people that are building their own render farm integration, it's also a good example of how to do that. So if for pipeline TDs and stuff like that, the code is shared on GitHub, so it should hopefully be straightforward for people to customize or build their own integrations, and it's potentially at minimum like a nice template for that. This is the job going. I don't know why I included this. It's like, hey, the job went to the deadline. So next up is movie render queue, right? So this is a feature that's been around for a long time. It was introduced in 425, so that was like pre-pandemic. I don't even know where I was back then. But it's been a long time. It's been in the engine for a long time, and it's used, so like everybody uses it. And it's something that it's been in need of a big update, and that's something that we've been focused on. Like really looking at this idea of scalable production rendering. And what I mean by scalable production rendering is, you start with a shot or a project like the Meerkat. This is an amazing project that I'm sure like many people in this room have like dug into. But when it comes down to it, it's a relatively small project, right? It's one sequence. It's, I think, 25 shots. But it's very contained, right? So it works well for what it is. But what what we're looking to get to is like, scaling this out, right? So like this is from a movie, right? We're talking about hundreds and thousands of shots, large teams of artists working together, and from a rendering perspective, there's a lot of improvements that we feel like we need to make, so that the system is more conducive to managing this type of scale and complexity. So what that ends up meaning is that we're focusing on a number of new features for movie render queue. So first up is render layers. Something that people especially coming from like the VFX animation world are going to be very familiar with and comfortable with. And then we get into like settings management, right? So like introducing this idea of inheritance where you can have like a show template that trickles down to the sequence, but it can be overrided, right? Like so overrides are a big part of it. Like like a supervisor can manage what everybody starts out with, and then it's very easy to like override it on a per shot basis if needed. And then we have nice visibility, so like when you're debugging a scene or if something doesn't look right or something's not working right, it's very easy to see like, okay, well here's where we had to deviate this per shot, and maybe we need to pull that back, or for debugging purposes, it's really important to like make sure that you know what's changed where. And part of this is like also like embracing this idea of compositing, right? So compositing will be decriminalized. But the idea here is like the final pixel aspect of Unreal has been really great for driving the overall quality of it, the quality of the renders that we're able to get. But at the same time, compositing is important, right? Compositing is part of how we finish the shot on a real world production. And so that's something that we're kind of steering into with this work to collaborate with compositing better. So in terms of what that's going to look like, we're making a shift in the methodology for movie render queue, where if you look at it, this is what it currently looks like now, and we're going to be taking these settings and basically pivoting to like a node-based setup. So in 5.4, we're going to be introducing the movie render graph. This is a node-based, artist-friendly way to manage the render settings, right? So this is the kind of stock setup. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be more complex than it is now, but you now have a way to like, do much more sophisticated things as well, right? So a couple things to start bringing up, right? So one of them is the pipeline aspect. So we're going to be introducing pre and post scripts as like a first-class citizen. So these will be nodes. Like you are able to do pre and post scripts now, but you have to do like a pretty heavy amount of customization. It's a much heavier lift on TDs than it really should be. So this is going to build in a way that's convenient. It feels just like some of the other tools that pipeline TDs have to support. But you're going to be able to do things like submit after the render, submit it to review systems. Like kick off other things. Orchestrate a lot of pipeline intelligence via the render, because like whenever render finishes, like that's interesting, right? Something else will probably want to happen after it. We're also going to introduce, as part of the graph system, like this is something that's part of most graph systems, but it allows you to build in data flow and logic to the system. So this will potentially allow you to like simplify, streamline the way that your settings are managed. So an example of this would be like having one graph that manages both like your kind of high and low settings, right? So you'd be able to do that with a select node. To build in like, okay, these are the default 2K settings and these are the default 4K settings, and be able to like, flip between them within that. You'll also be able to set up variables, right? So user variables will let you drive that logic, and by setting up a variable, you can also expose it up, right? So when the artist submits a job via movie render queue, like, when you can go ahead and like give them some options, right? I want high, I want low, like, potentially you're gonna have more than just one in this case. And what we're really trying to combat here is this problem that we see a lot, which is like every time I look at somebody's project and they open up like the presets menu for movie render queue, it just explodes and there's tons of settings and they're all duplicated. Hopefully the graph system will allow us to like streamline that more, right? So there's a lot of duplicates, right? Like in the 2K versus 4K setting, that previously had to be a 2K preset versus a 4K preset, and the artist would have to find those things. So hopefully this is going to be simplifying things, making it easier for people to use the right stuff, and then also allowing people to set up the system in a way that's like more convenient for artists when they submit their job. We're also going to be adding support for render layers, right? So just as a quick recap for render layers, this would be the idea where if you have a shot like this, you would want to render just the background, just the character, and potentially just the effects. I think hopefully the dust, there's like a little dust cloud in the bottom right. And then you'd be able to comp those together, in Nuke or whatever, your compositing application of choice. So for layers and passes, like a couple caveats just to call out, right? So we're adding support for layers and passes, but the goal remains to have great real-time performance. So we're looking to, we don't want to necessarily lose that, but we're also looking to add this post-production flexibility. So we're not necessarily going to aim for equivalent AOVs to offline renderers, right? So the Unreal is able to do a certain amount of passes, a certain amount in the path tracer, a certain amount, in deferred. That will continue to evolve over time. But it's, practically speaking, it's probably not going to be the same as some of the offline renderers. We still, one of the things we love about Unreal and working in real time is that, the artistic iteration is fast, right? So we don't necessarily want to lose that, and so there's still going to be certain cases where it does make sense to make a change. Maybe go back to lighting and make that change on the lighting side because it's going to be quick to re-render. But compositing is necessary and important, and this is a key aspect of how we can connect Unreal within a studio pipeline. So it's kind of a long way of saying that we are adding this stuff, but we still believe that there's going to be cases where it's faster to update the lighting and make sure it's a good render. A lot of times AOVs I feel like they're this mechanism for, it's like you're expecting there to be a slow render with problems, and our goal here is to provide fast renders that are good. And so hopefully we strike a good balance here by making compositors happy and also fast to make lighting updates. One other thing to mention on the layers is that you may or may not have noticed this, but the path tracer already supports holdouts. And so I show these examples, the example graph for layers with the path tracer, but we've been working really closely with the rendering team. Some people have seen variations of this presentation before. We've been really talking to people to assess what their needs are. So we've been praying to our rendering team and just everything we possibly can to get this over, but we're optimistic that it's going to also be available in deferred. So we're going to have both path tracer and deferred for render layers. In terms of how that's going to look in the graph, we'll kind of switch this over to the path tracer first and then kind of expand this out. So the graph is going to have a few new concepts. So there'll be a node for each render layer, and then we're also going to be introducing this concept of collections. So collections are like a rule-based way to define actors that are interesting Basically like I want it to be in this layer or I don't want it to be in this layer, as the case may be. So in this example, we set up like a character collection, environment and effects. And we will also have this idea of modifiers. So if you have no modifiers, like you're just passing everything through to the render, then that will give you the all layer. If you add a couple modifiers, right? So in this case, maybe we make the character invisible, we make the effects invisible. That's going to give us just the background environment layer. Likewise, if we hold out the environment, make the effects invisible, that will give us the character. And then kind of last but not least, if we hold out both the environment and the character, that will give us the effects layer. And those all connect up as part of the output. And the output mechanism is also how we deal with inheritance. So subgraphs will be a concept where you can have one graph and then you have another graph, pull it in, right? So this would be a quick example of how you do a per shot override. So maybe you have a shot that needs a new layer, right? You start out, it just passes everything through. But for a given shot, maybe we need to pull off, create a new collection. This particular shot needs a prop layer. So it should be pretty straightforward to basically say keep everything from the upstream graph, but I need to add on to it. And so artists will have the flexibility to do that without necessarily having to recreate all of the data from the other shot. Closing this out, there's a couple things I mentioned. The current movie render queue, it isn't going away yet. Like this is a really, this is a massive project for us. So the current movie render queue is going to stay. If you already have pipelines that are built on top of it, those are going to continue to work. We're going to continue to make sure that that does. But at the same time, we're going to be working with people to like move over. Hopefully, they're going to find the new graph-based system appealing, and we can get, we can move things in that direction. But there's a strong model for this in the engine. Anytime we do any of these big updates, we definitely don't want people to be disrupted if they're on the existing system, and we give ample time. There'll be a lot of material on how people can update. But that will be a big priority. The other thing to mention is that all of the existing settings will be available as nodes, like eventually. Like some of them I didn't show, like kind of for brevity, right? Like anti-aliasing, CVARs, all of those existing settings, they'll end up being nodes. There are a couple things that may take more than just the next release cycle to get, like panoramic rendering and display output. We have a long runway to get to 5.4 still, so we'll see how many we can get. But like just cards on the table. We may take more than one release cycle to get absolutely all of those things. We're definitely going to be focused primarily on the shot-based setup, right? So we showed all these examples of like we set everything up in sequencer, it's shot-based workflow. Our final destination is like a movie or a TV show or a cinematic. That's going to be the number one priority, and the others will hopefully make it as well. And if they don't, then it'll be very quick after that. So we'll close on this, right? So this is the city sample. You might be wondering, like, Ryan, why are you showing me this? I've already seen the city sample. Like, I'm very familiar with it, but potentially not like this. So I will zoom in here. And so this is the city sample. It's actually running on Vulkan instead of DirectX. And so what that means, Vulkan is the system that's used for other platforms, right? So specifically for virtual production purposes, it's really interesting because it means that we will be approaching rendering parity for Linux, and that's so like people who have tried out the system on Linux, you're very aware like we don't support ray tracing we don't support hardware ray tracing on Linux, and that's something that we're reaching a milestone where working towards experimental release where people are going to be able to use Linux and ray tracing, and it's very interesting. I'm super excited to see what this opens up, especially with the new movie render queue features coming on as well. That's it. Thank you for watching my talk. And how did I do on time? Happy to take some questions. I think there's a mic or, yeah.
show. 3, get ready. 4, 3, 2, let's go. Go, go, go. On your mark, get ready, set, go. Go, go, go. On that jump that, get up and go. Go, go, go. On your mark, you ready, yeah, go. the show. 3, get ready. 4, 3, 2, let's go. Go, go, go. On your mark, get ready, set, go. Go, go, go. On that jump that, get up and go. Go, go, go. On your mark, you ready, yeah, go. Diego.
Hello, hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, that's too bad. Louder? You want me to talk louder? Never heard that before.
All right, so.
Yeah, I'm the one on the left,
Yeah.
and I'm pretty sure Koby's on the right there.
Yeah. I mean, everybody knows Rob, probably.
Not everybody, but.
Yeah, do you want to present
Sure,
yourself?
I'll say what we do. I'm the visual effects supervisor and second unit director on Emancipation that we shot here in New Orleans. And I will start off by saying that, I really kind of don't belong in this group because I'm a piker, which is like a notch or two below beginner in Unreal. But I use it all the time. And I use it all the time because I like to previs lots of different things, ideas, things that I might turn into live action pieces, some things I want to see as a sequence, and develop kind of how or why I would do anything on stage. Also gives me a chance to get a crack at something where I get to see it realized, or I'm not really a conceptual artist, so it's hard for me to draw or do anything like that, so I need to get something where I can relate to, and I'm a cameraman, so the easiest thing for me to do is to shoot something. And before I used to shoot miniatures and little tiny things, and used to do a thing on Titanic with a lipstick camera and photograph the model of the ship to kind of get an idea of what a shot would be. And then I always wanted to do this. I always wanted to be able to grab by myself, not have a team of or a huge amount of people around me, and flounder. Put a camera somewhere and go, ugh, that's a bad idea. And I want to get those bad ideas out of the way before anybody sees them because I like to, work and my children need food and stuff, so I want to do all that sort of thing. So that's where my bias is on today's work. Unlike Koby, who's an expert, I'm the one who sort of comes up with ideas and things and wants to see them come to some degree of fruition before I go on stage and embarrass myself. So I'll give you the in case it's interesting, the brief.
I would just say that you undersell to everybody your Unreal skills because you're actually pretty good at it. I'm just going to throw that out there. But
well, you're going to see for yourself. You're not going to be terribly impressed. Here, the very first thing, just so it's kind of an interesting thing, when I first got the job, I was very good friends with, you show the slide of Bob Richardson and myself and all that. So Bob and I have worked. Bob is the one on the right. And I'm the handsome gentleman in the middle. I've never taken a better shot before in my life than that one. So Bob and I have worked together a lot. He wanted me to help him on this film. He wanted to come up with a look for the movie. And also there were some difficult things. And one of them was the alligator attack, which the producers couldn't figure out exactly how to budget it. They were thinking of $1 million animatronic, which has some huge limitations and all the various things. So I was essentially hired to, or asked to work on it to kind of help navigate or figure this out. And the first thing I did, the first thing I showed to Antoine, who's a wonderful man and a great director, and lovely to work with, I showed him a clip of something I thought would be good creatively of how we would attack this particular scene. So I'll show you this disgusting footage. Yeah.
it's a little strong for sure.
So hopefully you woke up. Is this working now?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can cut that off. So that was, the initial thing is like sometimes it's not exactly how you do the technical portion of the shot. It's also the creative. You could cut it off now. Yeah. It's not really about that. It's really about the concept or the idea. And the idea should be something where you don't want to in this particular film, because it's such a serious subject matter, it's Emancipation, you don't want to do a visual effect-y kind of thing. You want to do something that feels like it could be real Because as soon as you do something that's kind of fake or phony or gives itself away, you kind of lose the import of what it meant. And this is the only portion of the film that is kind of visual effecty, although we did visual effects for other portions, which I'll show you. For the most part, it's a pretty straight shot film, and a lot of my work is actually just doing straight second unit work, which I'll show as well. But this is my meager skills in Unreal, and I needed to come up with a way of shooting this attack with Will Smith, who is a big-time actor, a little less so now, but maybe. But he was huge at the time. And how do we shoot it safely? He's in a swamp, and how do we put him in regulated clean water so he has to keep his eyes open and things like that. So we came up with this idea of doing basically what amounted to a fish tank against a giant TV set. So that's where was introduced to Koby here and sort of the great stuff that Unreal does. I knew that you could do a lot of LED wall stuff. I was sort of helping Jon Favreau at the beginning of Mandalorian come up with the ideas, or help come up with the ideas and stuff. So I figured, well, this is a perfect example of very difficult to photograph if you ever do anything underwater. It's because of the murkiness of the water, it doesn't really get a good key, and it's a problematic. And you don't want to do dry for wet because it looks phony, doesn't look like you're really swimming. So how do I do it? So part of my thing when I use something like Unreal is to figure out how I would accomplish it, that it would work, because I could put a camera on it and say, oh, okay, with a 20mm lens from here, I would see off the set, or I would do whatever. How do I add stuff in the foreground, and how do I add stuff in the background? How do I add cutting pieces so I could continue to use the same small real estate over and over and over again? So that's where I tend to use the Unreal to help me figure out how I would then shoot it. Of course, worked with people who are not that brilliant, and one of the producers said, how do you know you're going to get an exposure? It's like, what? I mean, I'll tell you what, why don't you do this test for me? Get a glass of water, put it in front of your TV set, and if you could see through it, it's pretty much going to do the same thing. So I still think he didn't get it. But at any rate, then this becomes a hard sell. Part of the act of doing what I do for a living is a kind of a force of will, where you force what you think to be a good solution to a problem against a bunch of people who generally, the easiest thing is to say no. And the more proof you have that it could work, it should work, it will work, and it might be the best way of actually producing this film, is something that you need to have some material to show. And so my use of Unreal, as meager as it is to actually show somebody, this is the size, this is how big, this is the exact shot I can get, this is what I could use it for, because it answers all the questions. And if anybody else has a question, I could just reshoot and say, well, here's what it looks like with a 75mm lens, here's what it looks like 100. And discover that we could comfortably shoot outside, which Koby will show you, outside the tank. We don't actually even have to be in the water with him. And we could do our camera moves and things like that, and put foreground objects and things. We could comfortably shoot this and make it comfortable for the actor, comfortable for us to shoot it, and be able to get good stuff that, in this particular case, it was all little bits and pieces of live action. It was a real, not a real alligator, but a real fake alligator. And a bunch of guys in the scuba divers in the thing with, the alligator clamping. And you use, 18 frames of that, 16 frames of that. It's believable enough for that time frame. It doesn't do everything, so then you cut to something else, and you cut to something else, and you cut to something else. And part of the ritual for me for doing this is, if I mix all of the mediums together, if I do CG, and I do live, and I do some live actually in the swamps in New Orleans, I can mix it together. And one of the other tricks that one needs to do when you do this is devise a sequence that when you cut to the CG version of it, it feels like a continuation of the live action version. So it makes it a little more palatable to watch in terms of that you think all of it might be real because you're sort of convinced by the live action portions that it is real. So so you need stuff to edit with. So when I shoot this stuff, I edit it together. I keep on editing until I find the mix that I think is good. It's up to the audience to decide if I achieved my goal or not, but that's the way I try to achieve my goal. And this is what our setup looked like. But I'm gonna veer off to do something else. I'm gonna show you, don't start it yet. I'm gonna show you a reel that I used Unreal quite a bit to determine how I would stage and shoot second unit sequences. When you do second unit, if anybody's familiar, you have quite a bit less time, resources, and money, quite frankly, to actually produce something. So you're usually figuring out a shot that you could kind of cram together that looks like it's sandwiched into a much larger production. And so that was one of the rituals I do. And sometimes I record it. Sometimes I just walk into it. I prefer a lot of times to create a 3D environment and walk in it with in VR. Because being a cameraman, it's like the physicality of it. It's like, oh, well, now that I see it, I put a dolly track over here, put a camera over this way. This is a cool angle from here. And I could very quickly work. It might take longer if I'm just looking through a portal and I have to kind of discover these things. But if I could walk around like I would walk around on a set, it solves all of my problems. The other big sequence in the movie is the battle. And the battle, at one point, the director wanted to do it all as one shot, which was quite a challenge to do, what amounts to the import or the drama of the battle as one piece. So I had to basically preview it on Unreal, figure out how to do it, and then what do I need to rig it on the day to actually achieve the shots that we think we want to get, which I did. But let me just show you this second unit reel. So everything in it, I've either previewed, imagined, walked around in it. Sometimes I record it, sometimes I made sequences. But for the most part, it's my crutch to actually not embarrass myself, which I do quite a bit, as he can attest to. Do you have audio?
We should have
Why don't you turn it off until you get audio?
Yeah.
No, that's the behind-the-scenes reel.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Go.
You know how pleasant I am on the set.
Sorry, guys. Here you go. There's always a kink, right?
How about the audio?
Just give me one second.
You're doing so good too, Koby. Take my word for it, it's really good.
Did I not?
Does anybody who understands technical stuff want to jump up here? Like, is there a doctor in the house?
I'm not great at.
Well, you had the sound up a little while ago.
Yeah. Video format.
Well, that's no fun. Can you get audio out of this thing?
Yeah, exactly. There is a mute setting, but I don't see it.
Anybody have any questions so far? Yeah, go ahead.
Volume, high.
Yeah. No. Oh, no, we created the specs by me picking something, something that I thought was reasonable, and then keep on conferring with the special effects designer who knows the real physics of it, how much weight, how much, how thick the glass has to be. Of course, then it becomes expensive. So I started, a little larger and kept on honing it down. Also, to get one clear piece of plex had to be created, and then it only goes so far before it has to have a seam in it. So, and then I had a plan for if we had seams, if I had to do that, but then the seams also pose other problems. So what I did is you start with, then show somebody how much does that cost and what is it going to take, and then we confer back and forth until we hit a compromise. Anybody else have a question? Yes.
I mean, it's all put in the other.
Well, every movie I do informs the movie. What I discovered on Apollo 13, I took that and did a Titanic. What Titanic did was introduce me to Jim Cameron. You've heard of him, and he works in a very specific way. And we did this thing with a lipstick camera, which I actually did a demo in Unreal of what we did with the lipstick camera to actually create what amounts to previs that is more, physically correct, because it's the exact lens, it has a proper vanishing point and all that stuff. So that was the kind of the kickoff where if I could create a virtual camera that allows me to do what I did. That's the music, anyway. Oh, you did it playing off your laptop? Okay, good. Hope it worked. So at any rate, what I did there was like, well, then there might be an easier way of using a computer to actually do what we did with building a model with a little tiny camera, a video camera, then extracting storyboards from that and or video from that. So a lot of the techniques and things of shooting as much in camera as possible comes from Titanic, and that leads to the next movie, the next movie, the next movie. So it's all cumulative. It's not like one thing bridges another, but you learn so much from each endeavor because you're usually doing something you've never done before. And so you're learning at the same time you're producing, and then you have a chance to ruminate on it and go, okay, now that I've done that, what can I do better next time? And it keeps on going. And it's a never-ending quest. It'll continually be doing that. So I'll never really get good at this. I'll just be more and more proficient as I go along. Did I say something you didn't like? Oh, you're going to get to ask. Go ahead.
Rob, how do you get over the trepidation of budget? Because when you go into these things, I don't think there's any way for you to know how much it's going to cost. So how do you find yourself at ease?
You want to stop that, Koby?
Going forward?
For me, I'm concerned about the movie first and the budget second, but the budget is the playground that you need to play with. That's the one that it says, oh, in this movie, I've worked on huge movies, and this movie is $5 million for a visual effects budget, and they were really serious about it. So you have to come up with your ideas and various things and shape them to fit the playpen that has been created for you. So I like to do a lot of things myself, including even doing the previs, which could cost a lot of money when you send it out. That's one of the reasons why I learned to use the program, is that it costs $100,000, $200,000, whatever. You know how much it costs because you charge people for it, I think. So if I could do that and not waste that money for my effect that I want to do, or my shot or scene I want to create, it adds to that as opposed to it subtracts from that. So I'm budget conscious in that manner. And then I'm a cameraman, so I want to shoot as much physically in camera as possible. And as a visual effects supervisor, the more I intermix real things with computer generated or visual effect oriented things, the easier it is to succeed. You have to know a lot, and because you have so many controls and things when you do a total CG thing, that you have to really know a ton to make something absolutely photorealistic, which I'm sure everybody in the building, is advertising kind of what they do, which is quite remarkable. But before ray tracing and things like that, you have to fake everything, and your ability to fake it would determine if it was successful or not. So there is a huge amount it's easier to shoot something, and then that forces the CG artist to match that, and it doesn't vary too far into kind of fantasy land of thinking it looks real, but it doesn't really, that type of thing. I didn't realize I was going to stump everybody with the invention of sound.
There you go. I'm just going to open from here.
Okay.
And then I'll go back to the presentation.
But sound would still be cool. So it has sound because it was playing.
Okay.
Yes. Why can't we figure out sound? Is that the question?
Yeah, in a room full of visual screens producers.
Yeah. If I was in the sound mixing. Well, apparently a V company, not an AV company.
You're working into Unreal and adding this as like one of the toolkits that you keep fresh or try to keep around with. Like, what is it that you're finding fun about it? What are you just finding frustrating? Like, what do you think?
Well, I don't think this is the forum to go into the frustrating part, but I could go into the fun part. The fun part is the ability to light something, to pick a lens choice and pick a depth of field that you couldn't otherwise do and do successfully. So the facsimile you create, like a storyboard frame or whatever, all those things, that is my voice. I sang this song. I used a little AI, sound like Sam Cooke. Yes, this is way cheaper if I sing. I even forget the question that was.
What's
Well, yeah, the fun part is be able to actually physically light something and shoot it and get a facsimile of what that shot's going to be. Even the shots that I'm showing you here, I would be like, well, I want to see what a 150 millimeter lens looks like. So I get to preview it before I go on stage or on the set and shoot it, because that every amount of creative time that I waste figuring out what the shot is, I lose on the back end. I can't get another shot done. If it takes me 25 minutes to come up with a shot, and it does. Sometimes it takes hours to come up with a shot. Then I lose something on the back end. Because I'm doing second unit, I don't have the luxury of doing 8 shots in a day. I have to do 20 or 25. And I want it to look as good as the rest of the footage. So the more I could shortcut that. So for me as a cameraman, it's very fun to light something and actually see the facsimile of what it could really look like. Gives me a chance, like, no, I wouldn't put the light over here. Let me try a side lit. Let me try here. Let me try. And I can make all those, minute by minute iterations that otherwise would take a long period of time. That's why I like to do it myself, not because I'm better at it than anybody else, but I do have an eye. I do have what I want to achieve. And if I give it to somebody else to do it, they kind of tend to do what I ask them to do. And usually when I'm doing it, I go, bad idea, not there here. But they don't do that. They do what you asked them. I said, put the light there. They put it there. And then I have to discover X number of hours later that I would have changed it if I could. So that's the fun part. The frustrating part for somebody like me is I'm not as technically adroit as the rest of the people in the room, where it takes me a while to figure out what even something is called to change it. Like my favorite one was, I need to change the speed. How do I change the speed? And it never occurred to me, it's time dilation. It was like, holy shit. Well, that would have saved about 3 hours of knowing that somebody called it time dilation instead of speed. So that's the frustrating part for somebody like me.
I think we are going to try it.
Oh, I can't believe it. Now everyone's going to be disappointed. You get the A back from. So a lot of these shots are actually previewed. In Unreal, or just even to get the setup in my head. So when I go to the stage, I can shoot it.
It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will.
Like this shot, I heavily previs before I shot it.
It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die.
This is totally made up shot.
I don't know what's up there.
Helped with Unreal. This isn't.
Beyond the sky, it's been a long.
This is a drone shot, believe it or not.
Long time coming.
It was cut short in the movie, but it keeps on going out into the field. But that was a preview shot.
Oh, yes it will. I go to the movie and I go downtown. Somebody keep telling me don't hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Then I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Lord, there've been times that I thought I could last for long, but now I think I'm able.
A lot of times you have to shoot on sets that have not been built or dressed yet, and you have to kind of figure out what your shots are. It's easier for me to do it because I could dress it in Unreal and figure out how I would photograph something, how I would light it. Now, of course, in this movie, I have tremendous help with Bob Richardson, who is a spectacular photographer.
It's been a long
And so I'm matching what he's doing. Like I came up with this shot because I had the model of the set. And it's like, what's an interesting angle?
Change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die. 'Cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know.
If you look really closely, this is all the people I had, so in every shot, everybody's in every shot.
Oh, yes,
But I have to make it look like I have everything at my disposal.
I go to the movie.
So I like to go to the set prepared, at least with a plan that I could also alter and change on the day. And I love to light, so seeing things as silhouette and all that, and interactive light is always something that creates a little bit of movie magic when you don't have anything. And this is a really heavily previs scene. That was like one of the very first things I did besides the alligator was to previs this scene.
Then I go to my brother. And I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Lord, there've been times that I thought I could last for long.
Scenes like this, you don't have any of this stuff in front of you until on the day. So you have to pre-visualize what it could be like so that you could set something up effectively and know that if I put a camera at this height, that's one of the great things, the fun parts about Unreal is I get to see what a crane shot is, because otherwise you can't. Even when you go to the location, unless you have a crane, you can't see what it looks like from above, and that would be the shot that you want to do. Thanks, Koby. Thanks for all the hard sound work.
All right, let's go back to this presentation.
The other stuff, you don't have to show sound. It's okay. So that's kind of my use of the medium, and what's fun for me is that I get to hopefully get better and better as I do work, because I get to see something in advance and determine if it's good or bad, or if I could make it better when I get there. I could again, I have very meager skills, but I could take people off of Mixamo and burn them into Unreal, as long as I see a couple of instructional videos, and then be able to block out a shot and block it out, in focus, what selective focus we're going to have, what kind of dolly move we're going to do, all that stuff. And sometimes I don't even record it. It's just like, I got it. So now when I show up, I know. And it looks like I know what I'm doing. That's the other cool thing. It's like, yeah, put the camera over here, dolly track 20 feet, 20 millimeter lens down low. Look, it's like, wow, you really know your stuff. It's like, kidding?
If you like, the exploration gives you more possibilities.
Well, you do, because at least you know that will work. That's the bottom floor of it's going to be good, or it's going to be work well. Is that it's at least going to be as good as that. And then you can make it better. You can embellish it after the fact. And sometimes I change it, sometimes I don't. I guess I'll do quickly. I want to get to Koby's stuff. Let me show you the behind-the-scenes reel of Emancipation as well, which will show some stuff. One shot. This shot, I shot all the elements, all the people on my front lawn in Pasadena to create this kind of look. But I set it all up in Unreal, and I gave it to a visual effects company in Texas who actually produced the work. This is the only way to get the drone in here, so I didn't know that in advance, because you can't really do that on the day. You have to kind of know in advance to do it. And then this is the alligator tack with mixed CG with live underwater stuff with, and this is the setup. His illustrations are a little better than mine here. That's what the tank looked like. So it looked very similar to the drawing, the blueprint drawing that I used as the model for the previs. This I heavily prevised because it's kind of a risky thing to do. A burning horse, it could look too visual effecty or weird or whatever. So it led into the fact I actually previewed something with physics to show the visual effects company how I wanted the roof to collapse. Mine wasn't very good, but it showed them, oh, I don't want you to animate it. I want you to use a simulation. And I could get the simulation in Unreal to make something that looks believable to my eye, even though I want it more embellished. So it gives me an ability. Before I could do this, I could not describe to somebody what I wanted. This is the shot that that we heavily previs to determine where I was going to put the cable cam, which is a very expensive item, and so you don't want to put it up twice. You want to do it once, and you have to kind of know what you're talking about when you do it. So I had to figure out what the creative shot was, and then how can I mount a camera and do it. So you'll see the previs that somebody from Agnopus helped me. I think his name's Kalen, if I guys said his name correctly, who came up with, in Unreal, getting all these soldiers to be in when I hit live and I could run my camera through it. They would be doing all the stuff so I could preview what the shot might look like. So even though it's slightly different, and I changed on the day, for the most part, the scene is the same. But this was a huge help for me, and it's a huge help for the director and the director of photography and the physical effects guys and the production designer to know how this place is going to lay out so we can actually get the drama of the shot. And so you see that this becomes the shots that are featured in here. At one point, it's going to be all one shot, so I had to figure out how I was going to glue all of them together. But when the editor, he didn't really know that we were going to do that. And when he put it together, it was so powerful mixed with the other footage that it was like, well, I don't need to do that now, even though, but the shots were still the shots. I don't know if there's any more in this. Okay, now, Koby, you're going to be on. I could run the thing if you like. I could use a clicker.
There is not that much for me to say, really. I think it's just to guide us through the conversation, so you can keep commenting on top of these things.
Okay, the thing then to introduce Koby's portion is that once we figured out put a aquarium in front of a TV set, then how do you physically do it? What's involved in doing it? What kind of background you need to create? How does we actually photograph it? And how do I have the flexibility on the set with people who are not fluent in LED wall technology and things like that, and convince them, especially the idiot who thought I couldn't get an exposure on the wall because we're shooting through water. So at any rate, so it helps solve a bunch of problems. So then we turn it over to Koby here to actually put the wall up, get all the measurements, and part of the Unreal portion of it, which you should now take over, is the physicality of blocking it out and seeing if our plan is actually holds water. So to excuse the stupid pun.
Rob already had everything how he wanted to do it, right? So that makes it a lot easier to work with somebody, with a filmmaker like Rob that already understands all of and comes with a plan ready for you to execute. Sometimes we have to give a little bit more help into understanding what their vision is, right? In order to bring it to life. It wasn't the case here. There was still a lot of coming to Fuse and testing things and bringing producers and doing demos and convincing people.
I told everybody it was going to work, and then I had to prove it.
Yeah. But yeah, so like the tank was a big collaborative effort. I think Legacy also built the tank, right?
No, the Legacy built the alligator.
Just the alligators. Okay, so we had a couple partners, but it was a lot of people in order to just build this. And yeah, like Rob said, he came already with measurement. We discussed it for a while if we were going to shoot it at Fuse. If we weren't, the shoot kind of grew. The amount of people also in Will's entourage is pretty large. So this is another picture of the tank already when we were filling it up. There's a little video just to show the positioning of the LED.
And that's where the producers come around and go, you're insane. What the hell is this? What are you doing? It's like, it'll work.
Right.
But it's a kind of a cool thing to envision something in your head, have sort of proof along the way and then actually seeing it come together and that it actually could work. And that's where we rely on people like Koby and his company and Legacy and everybody that's involved. I mean, I didn't invent the technology, but once I know the technology exists, how do I use it in my favor? We had some wonderful work done by Weta where we prevised and modeled the alligator that Legacy was going to make. They did their work. I cut it together to try to create these overlaps so that, because I know that the animatronic can, or it's not really an animatronic, but it can only last for a couple of seconds on screen before it doesn't do everything you need it to do, and that's where you have to cut to a CG shot. But you have to devise the CG shot to be an overlap of action so that it feels like it's all in one sequence. And before that shot is over, you don't really, hopefully, not know that it was something that was totally fake. But Weta also helped create the background that they're going to use in their CG shots, which they coordinated with Koby to put into our background on the set.
Yeah, it was definitely like a lot of collaborated effort. Like, so there is some pictures on top when we were still like just building the volume control area. Alligator, there is a lot of testing the refraction with the LED and the magnification and the pixels and how all that would work. Obviously, like this is just my iPhone, but we did a lot of tests. Weta did some tests also with a little fish tank.
Exactly what I said. It's a fish tank in front of a TV set, and that's what they did to preview. So we're honestly continuing. It's not that cavalier. We're continually proving or disproving, and maybe we'll learn something. Maybe it's like, oh Jesus, that tank is too small or too big or whatever. The one thing we didn't test, and we never could until today, is how dirty the water gets in a very short period of time. Where it's like, holy shit, we can't see Will in this shot.
Especially when the blood starts coming.
And the blood starts coming, and then it got really cloudy, so we had to wait, and they have to go in and start vacuuming and scrubbing that. So even you think of everything, you think, there's always one thing that bites you in the ass.
Yeah. So just to get to the Unreal content, it was Unreal 427. There was a lot of things that everybody was still figuring out. And yeah, like Rob said, he was in every meeting guiding the conversation, but there was a lot of back and forth with Weta, us, and what handles we wanted to control on the day, because they did the VAD work and then we did the on-set work. But basically, Rob was in control of deciding how we would change the environment around and things like that. So there is some images from Unreal. I made a little video showing some of these controls. It's super sped up, but the underwater setup in Unreal is actually not super complex. It's like a
looks pretty good.
Height fog, yeah. It's a height fog basically, and an important thing for you I think was like the murkiness of the water. Some points, like if we wanted to see it more or less, how that would look, because I think like we're gonna see it in these other BTS, but like the cool thing about this is getting depth, right?
Yeah.
Like, isn't that one of your main points, I think?
Yeah, and and also, for the stuff I'm trying to do is I'm trying to throw it away as if we really shot it, and we're not making every shot precious and show off, look how cool this thing is, because it doesn't want to be that. And again, it's inspired by the first clip where it's fast and furious, and you don't even have any time to think, and it's over before you know it. And so if you belabor it, you're showing off. You're artificially extending something that, if you want to have the shock value of what that first clip does, every shot after that has to be like that. And again, it's a bit throwaway. It just wants to look realistic enough. And we're just shooting Will, so he's that close, so the background's out of focus. But you still want to see something and know that when you cut to a little bit of the wider shot that you're going to do in CG, that it matches, that it feels like it lives. And honestly, throughout the day, as it got more murkier and murkier, we had to kind of use less of the fog in Unreal to make that adjustment. And thank God, you need to be able to do it live. I mean, the idea of doing it beforehand, before we even knew that it was going to get that turbid and that it's going to be that diffuse, we would be stuck. Then you have to go re-render it or something like that, or take time of the day. But we could just do a knob.
Yeah, I mean, getting these handles was definitely really good because like we also had real caustics and real God rays, so like matching that on the day was pretty cool. I'll just go through some of these BTS videos.
do it.
We don't need to.
And if you have
really...
questions while we're doing it, you know, so it sparks a question. Oh, now you got audio.
I don't know that video. What
It's not your
happened?
stuff.
So that's the first shot in that sequence when the alligator pulls him in. But you can really see that, like you really see the backgrounds back there, right? So I think that selling, we did sell the depth, which was cool. There was a lot of, like, it was actually a pretty small environment, so we adjusted a lot per shot to make it look different.
Question about the setup. I noticed you built the wall about.
I think, use the mic if you can, because so the live stream can pick up. Oh, guys, can we get the mic?
You built the wall pretty high, and I just I wondered if that actually gave you value, because I noticed that when we shoot up through the water, and it's like one of the magic tricks of the surface of water. Did you see that, or did you know what was going to happen?
Not really. It was more for just added reflections and things like that. I mean, if I ever did a shot where I'm looking up, I actually tilt the whole thing back towards the wall, and the up part is what's the background. Because if I look up, I'm going to see the mismatch between. I can see the mismatch of our real water, and so this is basically like a glorified RP screen where everything you shoot is against the screen, no matter what. If someone's coming at you and they're coming from the surface, you just basically say, okay, now the background is the surface of the water, and they're swimming towards you. And because they only have a small amount to go, you create the shot with the moving background that they're swimming, so it looks like the camera's moving with them, but they're not. And so it's
yeah. So like for instance, here there are some moments that they were shooting low and they were seeing the water line from under, and we could control how high our water in Unreal was to try to match it. So it depended on the shot, but like even on Rob's previs, he had the LED pretty high up because I feel like you really wanted the reflection.
And one of the other shots I wanted to do, and then I decided not to do it, is have him on the surface and get pulled underneath or try to get back on the surface. I end up using which I wanted to use anyway, is something I shot at the real swamp with the stunt guy who comes up and he stabs it. And you see him come up out of the water, but he's coming out of the real swamp. And so again, you know, everybody has styles different. Mine is to intermix as much live as possible, so you never have a moment to go, which one was the fake shot, which one was the real shot. You always have a reminder of something that's real. But at one point it was devised, I'm trying to remember now all the particulars why I did it, was for like you see him above the surface, but I never used it.
Yeah.
And the previous part, sorry, I apologize.
No, you're good.
I do see companies, especially with larger stunts, vaulting cars through space, that sort of thing. They're doing a lot of on-set previs. It's usually coming out of the stunt crew, right? Or maybe a second unit. But when you were on this shoot, was there previs on the day that you were playing with?
I don't remember.
We were doing a little bit of work, and Rob would come, like he was super busy, and we were trying to adjust things as the day went. We weren't just shooting this shot. There was like the honey tree, and there were some other things happening that were also Unreal in camera, but he would come and sit with us, and that's the beauty. He can get into Unreal and roll up his sleeves.
In fact, I know a little bit is a little bit to be dangerous.
Yeah. Let me show this real quick. Go back to this, and just so I can finish skipping through these videos. But the reason why I put this one up was, there you go, play. It was just because like I did a side-by-side of, it's the same shot, obviously it's different takes, but there's him with the alligator on the left and him without the alligator on the right.
That was for the CG one.
So Rob could cut in the CG, yeah.
And a lot of times I'll double cover something. I'll cover it. I know they're going to do with a CG creature, and some that I could intercut with, where I might cut into the close-up and tilt up, or whatever. So I could have both, because of some, you know, the animatronic, as good as it is, and Legacy's like the best in the business. You can only do so much where you don't believe it.
Seth, give us the blood.
I'm impressed you have sound on every one of your videos.
I know, it's magic. I'm sorry.
Is any more questions? We're starting to run low on time. I'll talk as much as until you start booing me off the stage.
Yeah, I mean, anybody, I guess.
Seth, give us the blood.
You guys can cut the audio from the video if you can.
Yeah, just to be fair to me.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yes. We did tests on it, and we kind of figured out what the lens difference was between what you would see through the wall. So we changed the background was not necessarily the same lens as what the foreground was, because through the tank it magnifies the background. So we did some tests. Weta did some tests for me, and I forget what the formula is now.
Yeah, there was like a math.
And it's crazy forgiving. You know, it's really hard for, especially in an action scene. Like you get away with a lot in an action scene because you don't have enough time to process. You know, unless physics are wrong, that's when you could see it instantly, because our brains are trained to see what real life is. And then all of a sudden, when somebody's doing something like in a superhero movie where you see them fly with a weird center of gravity, you pick that up right away. But in something like this, the illusion of what's out of focus, what's the caustic light, the background, because you know, you don't really know in a 2D world, is it 100 feet away, is it 10 feet away, is it a big log, is it small, you know, you don't. We try to make it everything as exact as it would really be, so we can rely on that, because even we get fooled by it. If it was wrong, I might not be able to pick it out until I see it 1,000 times on a big screen, so.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes reviewing it, it's tough. We only have like 24-inch monitors.
Yeah,
so. And
and you also have the pressure of the day. Anytime you're doing any live action work, there's a lot of pressure on the day to speed up. And I had the idiot here who was really surprised that you could get an exposure through the water. I think there's another young lady behind you who has a question.
Yeah. And another thing that we did, but yeah, please come up for your question, is just like we could adjust the Unreal focal distance and how much we wanted the background to actually be sharp or blurred out. So that was helpful too in that sense.
Yeah, and we would change the light in the background too. We'd add a little more light, a little more kind of God ray sort of light to pick up a highlight to make it feel like it has more depth, things like that. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Great. I think I have two questions. So the first one is, output looks really gorgeous. I'm just curious, if you were to do this again, what would you do differently, or what were some lessons learned? And then the second part is, so I work at an ICVFX stage out in New York, and I think a struggle that I have is directors who have shot traditional film are, you know, never done anything like this before, and so it's always, oh, I don't know, maybe next project. What's your advice for getting people who are established in the industry to want to experiment, either using it for LED for 2D or virtual production?
Well, I answer the second question. I don't know exactly what I would do differently. I mean, always when you go through the cycle of doing it, and what shot is more important and what shot isn't, and all that sort of stuff. So I don't really know. I wasn't really prepared for that answer. You know, what I would do differently. I liked what we did. I was happy with it. You know, I still never know until an audience tells you that they like it too, that they believe it or whatever. But you know, for me, you know, even looking at it now, I'm going, I think that the idea was sound, that this is a good use for this particular medium. The other one is a harder question, because what I discover for me is it's a force of will. I have to force somebody to see something, to experience it, because their tendency is to rely on what they know, not what they don't know. My job is a little more of, let's do something we've never done before, so the uncomfortable nature of will it work or will it won't work is something that you sort of get comfortable with. And with Unreal, I get to even preview the preview. I could show somebody in VR, here's what it looks like in 3D if you were to walk up to the stage. and you would now look what it looks like, and then you look through the camera. And so that helps guide people who are completely nervous about this sort of idea that, oh, I could see a simulation of it. And so before I even step foot on stage, I could see how big the wall is. I could see how far it is. The DP can say, you know, I'm a DP too, so it's easier for me to predict what it's going to look like, and I work with people I like working with. That the calculation I made is to allow them to do their work, to light as well, as opposed to I just made something that was impossible for them to work, which gives people a negative response to it. Like, I tried it once and the thing was too close and I couldn't light it, and you know, it didn't match, and the light was spilling on the wall. You know, all those things have to be kind of pre-figured out. So sometimes it literally is a force of will to get people to, you know, like the you know, even though I'm joking about the guy with the water, he was an impediment to getting this done and was trying to kill it at every opportunity, literally every opportunity. But because I worked with Antoine, I worked with Bob Richardson, they have grown to trust me from past projects, not Antoine necessarily because it was my first one, but Bob has, if I said it was going to work, it was going to work. Now I also go through a lot of work, as you can tell, previewing that it will in fact work, to make sure that the idea is sound or continues to be sound as you go through every step. So it's hard for me to tell you exactly what to do. I have a force of will, and I have a lot of knowledge in cinematography and editing and directing and staging, so I can appeal to someone and then prove it by using this technology, which, you know, is a real gift for somebody like me, because my force of will not work if I can't show anybody something in advance. They just won't buy it. So no matter how strong I have an argument. Does that answer your question at all?
When people see it live, I think it really changes everything, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that's one of the main things. We bring a lot of filmmakers by to actually do demos, and then when you were able to talk in their language and get them comfortable, that's when they...
Ready, set, go. On your mark, get ready, set, go.